My friends, there exists a peculiar kind of soul, one that does not seek the noise of the crowd, but instead withdraws into the silence of its own depths. These are the intuitive introverts, people who live primarily in the invisible world of ideas, possibilities, and symbols. They are visionaries, dreamers, and philosophers. Yet within this gift lies a hidden danger, a dark shadow that can consume them if they are not careful. For the very strength of their intuition can become their greatest weakness if left unchecked. I must warn you, as one who studied the psyche with utmost seriousness, the path of the intuitive introvert is both a blessing and a curse. It can lead to wisdom, transformation, and profound creativity, or to isolation, detachment, and madness. The intuitive introvert, by their very nature, is drawn irresistibly toward what is not yet visible. Their mind does not settle comfortably upon the things that are, but constantly stretches toward the horizon of what might be. They are not content with the simple facts of the present moment, for they sense possibilities behind every occurrence, threads of meaning woven into the smallest of details, patterns that point toward futures no one else has yet considered. This quality makes them visionaries, but it also makes them vulnerable. For the same gift that allows them to perceive beyond the veil can lead them to live in a world of imagined futures while neglecting the reality before their very eyes. To such a person, the present moment often appears dull, incomplete, or unworthy of their attention. They look past what is happening now, yearning instead for what might one day become. In doing so, they risk abandoning the very ground upon which their lives are built. Life is not lived in the future, it is lived in the present. Yet the intuitive introvert often feels estranged from this truth, as though their true existence belongs to what lies ahead. They may dream endlessly of what they could create, who they could become, or what great changes might one day occur. They imagine different scenarios, alternate lives, infinite possibilities. But in this fascination with what is coming, they lose touch with what is already here. They forget that the future is only ever born out of the present, and that to neglect the present is to starve the soil from which their imagined possibilities might grow. The danger of this tendency is profound. One can spend years, even decades, trapped in anticipation, always waiting for the moment when life will finally begin, when circumstances will align with the grand visions of the mind. But that moment never arrives, because life is not waiting somewhere in the distance. It is unfolding now. To disregard the present in favor of imagined futures is to waste the only reality we truly possess. The intuitive introvert may not notice this loss immediately, for the richness of their inner world sustains them. Yet, over time, reality asserts itself. The neglected present grows thin, relationships fade, opportunities are missed, and the inner dreamer awakens to find that while they lived in the future, the present slipped away without them. Carl Jung understood this peril deeply, for he knew that the psyche must find balance. Intuition, without grounding in the here and now, becomes fantasy, and fantasy, when unchecked, leads to estrangement from life. The intuitive introvert must learn the discipline of returning to the present, of anchoring their visions in reality. They must remind themselves that possibility is only valuable if it is given form in action, and action can only take place in the present. To embrace the moment as it is, not as it might one day be, is perhaps the most difficult task for such a mind, but also the most necessary, for only in honoring the present can the future they imagine ever come to life. The intuitive introvert is haunted by an inner world that does not rest. Their unconscious is vast, deep, and turbulent, filled with symbols, archetypes, and visions that rise to the surface unbidden. Unlike the extroverted type, who finds escape in the distractions of the outer world, the introvert of intuitive temperament often finds themselves trapped within the labyrinth of their own psyche. The danger lies in being consumed by this inner realm, for the unconscious, when not balanced by conscious effort, becomes a devouring force. Jung warned that those who plunge too deeply into their imagination without structure or discipline risk becoming lost in it, unable to distinguish the symbolic from the real, the metaphor from the fact. For the intuitive introvert, the unconscious is not a distant background but a constant presence, whispering through dreams, impressions, and subtle feelings. They sense meanings in everything, but this constant flood of associations can overwhelm them. What begins as a gift of deep perception can easily become a curse of disorientation, where life itself seems like a riddle with no solution. They may retreat further into solitude, withdrawing from the world in search of clarity, only to become further entangled in the webs spun by their own imagination. The unconscious, when left unchallenged, grows stronger, taking on the qualities of a shadow that looms over their waking life. The danger intensifies when the intuitive introvert resists engaging with the external world. Jung insisted that the psyche seeks balance. When one side of the personality dominates, the neglected side demands attention, often in destructive ways. For the intuitive introvert, ignoring the world of sensation, the grounding reality of the body, the material, and the tangible, creates an imbalance that leads to suffering. They may neglect their physical needs, their relationships, even their responsibilities, all in service of chasing the whispers of their inner visions. But reality does not vanish simply because it is ignored. It reasserts itself with consequences, failed opportunities, fractured bonds, or even the disintegration of one's mental stability. Jung's warning is clear. What the intuitive introvert experiences as inspiration can become intoxication. The unconscious can seduce them into believing they have discovered profound truths, when in reality they are drifting further from what is useful, what is grounding, what sustains life. Their insights, while potentially powerful, lose meaning if they are not anchored in the real world. They risk becoming prophets of illusions, carrying visions that inspire no action, bearing wisdom that never takes form. The challenge, therefore, is not to silence the unconscious, but to navigate it with awareness. To enter its depths with the discipline of a traveler rather than the recklessness of a wanderer. To recognize that the unconscious is a source of guidance, but not a substitute for reality. The intuitive introvert must learn to walk the fine line between vision and delusion, between depth and drowning, for only then can their inner world become a source of creation rather than destruction. Isolation is the silent poison that threatens the intuitive introvert. Drawn naturally inward, they often prefer solitude to the noise of social life. Yet what begins as a necessary retreat can evolve into a dangerous withdrawal from reality. Jung observed that when individuals retreat too deeply into themselves, they cut the vital threads that connect them to the world of others, and in this separation, their inner life swells until it becomes unbearable. The introvert believes they are protecting themselves from the demands of the external world, but in truth, they may be nurturing their own downfall. For the intuitive introvert, isolation magnifies the voices of the unconscious. Alone, they become hyper-attuned to inner impressions, archetypes, and symbols, but without the grounding influence of human interaction, these forces distort reality. They may mistake imagination for revelation, fantasy for truth, and suspicion for insight. This isolation feeds a cycle. The more they withdraw, the less they feel understood, and the less they feel understood, the deeper they retreat into themselves. What they perceive as self-preservation is, in reality, self-destruction. The unconscious thrives in silence, growing louder and more invasive until it becomes tyrannical. Isolation also deprives the intuitive introvert of the friction necessary for growth. Jung emphasized that it is in relationship with friends, adversaries, communities, that we discover our blind spots, confront our shadows, and expand our consciousness. When one avoids others, they avoid this confrontation, and thus remain trapped within their own narrow vision. They may believe they see deeply into the world, but in fact, They are only circling endlessly within the walls of their own mind. The isolation becomes a hole of mirrors, reflecting back their own fears, their own doubts, their own projections, until they mistake these reflections for reality itself. The danger is not simply loneliness, but psychic imbalance. To exist entirely within one's own symbolic universe is to lose the grounding of the body, the richness of human connection, and the stabilizing rhythm of daily life. Jung knew that the psyche seeks wholeness, and wholeness requires relationship, with the outer world as much as the inner. Without this balance, the intuitive introvert risks fragmentation, a splitting between inner fantasy and outer reality that can no longer be reconciled. Yet the warning is not a condemnation of solitude. For Jung, solitude was sacred when used for reflection, creativity, or renewal. But when solitude hardens into isolation, when it becomes a prison rather than a sanctuary, the intuitive introvert endangers themselves. The key lies in engagement, seeking out connection not to escape the inner world, but to give it shape, grounding, and purpose. Without this bridge to others, the introvert's depth becomes their drowning pool, and what could have been wisdom becomes madness. The greatest peril for the intuitive introvert is the shadow, that hidden part of the psyche, which contains all the traits they deny, reject, or repress. Jung warned that the more a person identifies with their conscious personality, the image they wish to uphold, the stronger and darker their shadow grows. For the intuitive introvert, who prides themselves on insight, imagination, and subtle perception, the shadow often manifests as arrogance, detachment, or a quiet disdain for the ordinary lives of others. They may not admit it, but buried beneath their refined exterior lies anger, envy, or even a lust for power that they dare not acknowledge. The danger comes when the intuitive introvert projects this shadow onto the world around them. Instead of recognizing their own hidden flaws, they begin to see them everywhere in others, accusing the world of being shallow, manipulative, or corrupt, while failing to see that these same forces reside within themselves. This projection distorts their relationships, turning friends into adversaries, partners into enemies, and the world into a stage upon which their disowned darkness plays out. They may believe they are perceiving truth, when in reality, they are merely gazing upon their own denied self. Jung emphasized that the shadow is not evil in itself, but ignored or denied, it becomes destructive. For the intuitive introvert, repression of the shadow can lead to a split within the psyche. Their conscious self may aspire toward wisdom and morality, but their hidden self pulls them toward bitterness, sabotage, or even cruelty. This tension creates inner suffering, as if two opposing forces are at war within them. Left unresolved, this inner conflict can manifest outwardly in destructive choices, broken relationships, or the inability to sustain meaning in their life. The shadow also represents unrealized potential. Those qualities the intuitive introvert despises in others may in fact be parts of themselves that must be integrated. For example, their disdain for the practical and material may conceal an undeveloped capacity for groundedness and responsibility. Their discomfort with confrontation may hide a latent strength for courage and assertion. To reject these qualities entirely is to remain incomplete, stunted in their growth, and forever haunted by the forces they refuse to claim as their own. Jung's warning is clear: to fear the shadow is to give it power. The intuitive introvert must have the courage to turn inward, to face the ugliness they would rather ignore, and to recognize that the darkness within them is part of the whole. To integrate the shadow is not to become corrupted, but to become balanced, to draw strength from qualities once feared, and to live with authenticity rather than illusion. Only then can the intuitive introvert move beyond the danger of projection and isolation, transforming what once threatened to destroy them into a source of true inner power. Another danger that Jung highlighted for the intuitive introvert lies in their tendency to become ensnared by their own inner visions. Intuition, when unchecked by reason or grounded experience, can carry a person far away from the world of reality into the realm of fantasy, illusion, and self-deception. The intuitive introvert may feel they are uncovering profound truths about existence, destiny, or the hidden patterns of life. Yet what they are actually doing is spinning narratives that are disconnected from the tangible world. They drift into speculation without anchor, mistaking inner images for external realities, and in doing so, they risk losing themselves in a labyrinth of their own creation. Jung described intuition as a powerful function, a way of perceiving the invisible threads that connect events and experiences. Yet power without discipline is perilous. For the intuitive introvert, the flood of impressions, symbols, and possibilities can become overwhelming. They may begin to confuse subjective impressions with objective facts, or treat passing fantasies as revelations. This tendency, if unchecked, leads them to detach from the present moment, ignoring the simple and practical demands of life in pursuit of ideas that exist only in their imagination. The result is often frustration, alienation, and a sense of disconnection from those who live with their feet firmly planted on the ground. This drift into fantasy is not mere daydreaming, it can become a seductive trap. The intuitive introvert may start to prefer the inner world to the outer one, withdrawing more and more into visions that feel profound but fail to manifest in any real form. They may speak of future possibilities endlessly but never act. They may construct elaborate theories about life, yet neglect their own relationships, health, or responsibilities. Jung understood that this tendency could lead not only to personal dissatisfaction, but also to psychological imbalance, as the psyche rebels against being consumed entirely by one-sided fantasy. The danger is that such unchecked imagination blinds the introvert to reality's hard edges. When confronted with the world's demands, they may grow resentful or despairing, feeling misunderstood or oppressed, when in truth, it is their own refusal to engage with reality that breeds suffering. Their visions, instead of inspiring growth, become burdens that weigh them down. What could have been a gift of foresight becomes a prison of illusions. Yet within this danger lies potential. Intuition, when disciplined and balanced, provides remarkable insight and creativity. The task for the intuitive introvert is to tether their visions to the ground, to test their insights against reality, and to translate their inner images into meaningful action. Without this discipline, they risk wasting their lives in a fog of possibilities that never become real. But when they succeed in bringing their visions into the world, they transform what was once a source of peril into a gift of extraordinary value, both for themselves and for others. Jung also warned that one of the most insidious dangers for the intuitive introvert is isolation. Their natural withdrawal from the external world, coupled with a preference for the inner life, often leaves them detached from the rhythms of human connection. What begins as solitude, which is necessary for reflection and inner growth, can gradually become estrangement, a widening gulf between themselves and the shared life of others. The intuitive introvert, consumed by their private visions, may look out at the world and find it noisy, shallow, or hostile, and in response they retreat further into their own mind. This creates a cycle where the very act of withdrawal deepens their sense of being cut off, misunderstood, or unrecognized. Jung understood that man is not a purely individual being. He is also bound by the collective, by culture, by relationships, by society. When the intuitive introvert withdraws too far, they risk severing this bond and the psyche begins to suffer. The unconscious, deprived of its connection to the shared life of humanity, turns inward upon itself, producing distortions, fantasies, or compulsions. In isolation, the shadow grows unchecked, and the visions of the introvert become increasingly divorced from reality. What once might have been creative insights begin to feel like obsessions, and the individual can sink into despair, paranoia, or deep loneliness. This danger is heightened because the intuitive introvert often believes their withdrawal is a sign of superiority. They may imagine themselves apart from the world not because they are vulnerable, but because they are above it, too refined, too profound, too perceptive for ordinary society. Yet this belief is itself a trap, an illusion of the ego that blinds them to their own dependence on human connection. Jung saw this as a mask the psyche creates to hide the deeper wound, the fear of rejection, the fear of not belonging, and the difficulty of facing the demands of shared life. Isolation also prevents the introvert from testing their ideas and intuitions against the reality of others. Alone, every vision seems flawless, every insight unquestionable. But in dialogue with others, weaknesses are revealed, blind spots uncovered, and illusions challenged. Without this testing ground, the intuitive introvert risks becoming trapped in a closed system of thought, mistaking private imagination for universal truth. Over time, this can lead not to wisdom but to delusion. Yet, solitude in itself is not the enemy. Jung valued it as a necessary path for inner development. The danger arises only when solitude hardens into isolation, when the introvert no longer returns from their inner journeys to share, to connect, to participate in the communal life of humanity. To resist this fate, the intuitive introvert must recognize that the inner and outer worlds are not enemies but partners. They must learn to walk the line between solitude and connection, carrying their inner insights back into the world of relationships and action. Only then does their gift of intuition enrich not only themselves, but the wider human whole. Perhaps the most profound warning Jung offered to intuitive introverts is the danger of neglecting the shadow. Because their gaze is so often turned toward possibility, toward hidden patterns and future potential, they are tempted to look away from the darker aspects of their own nature. The shadow, the repressed, unacknowledged, and often uncomfortable side of the psyche remains unseen, and in its unseen state, it grows in power. For the intuitive introvert, this neglect is especially dangerous, for it allows destructive tendencies to operate unconsciously, shaping behavior and perception in ways they cannot recognize. The shadow does not vanish simply because it is ignored. On the contrary, it manifests in subtle forms, projected onto others, disguised in moral posturing, or hidden behind lofty visions. The intuitive introvert may speak of ideals, of destiny, of universal truths, but underneath there may lurk envy, pride, resentment, or fear. Without confronting these darker elements, their visions become contaminated, their insights distorted by the very impulses they refuse to acknowledge. Jung observed that what remains unconscious does not cease to exist. It acts in secret, guiding choices and reactions in ways that undermine the individual's integrity and wholeness. For the intuitive introvert, the danger is compounded by their detachment from the external world. They may believe that by retreating inward, they escape the ugliness and corruption of life. Yet the corruption is within, not outside. By denying the shadow, they become blind to their own capacity for cruelty, selfishness, or deceit. This blindness not only harms themselves but also poisons their relationships. They may accuse others of flaws that are, in fact, their own, or they may adopt a false spiritual superiority that conceals unacknowledged weakness. In this way, the shadow, left unintegrated, becomes a silent tyrant ruling from the depths. But Jung did not view the shadow merely as a burden. It is also a source of vitality, creativity, and authenticity. By confronting it, by naming it, by integrating its contents into conscious life, the individual becomes whole. For the intuitive introvert, this confrontation is essential if they are to prevent their gift of vision from turning into delusion. The shadow grounds them, reminding them that they are not ethereal beings floating above the world, but human beings bound by instinct, desire, and limitation. To embrace the shadow is to embrace the fullness of life, with all its contradictions and struggles. Thus the dark warning to intuitive introverts is clear. Do not ignore what lies in the depths of your own psyche. To flee from the shadow is to become its victim. To face it is to gain strength and wisdom. Only by acknowledging the darkness within can the light of intuition shine clearly, and only then can the intuitive introvert transform their inward gift into a path not of escape, but of genuine self-realization and contribution to the human whole.